talk back. So let me remind you of a couple things. I want to remind you a little bit of last week's sermon and some stuff that didn't go in the sermon, and then just a tiny bit about today's, and then let your minds, you can work on your minds that way, and then I want to introduce Megan and let her talk a little bit about her book and about her life. So last week in the sermon on the Ethiopian eunuch, one of the things I mentioned to you was that, a lot of us, it wasn't as if this story, somebody stuck it in the Bible like 50 years ago. Like it's been there the whole time. And yet, we really haven't talked about it in Sunday school or in worship very often. I think for some of us, it's like, I kind of barely remember that story, and part of it is there are textual reasons for that. So I mentioned to you in the sermon that there's two main sections in Acts. And Luke, when he wrote both books, the Gospel of Luke and the Acts of the Apostles, says at the beginning, I've researched, I've found all the stories I could find about Jesus and about the early church, and I brought them together to tell the best version of the story. So we know he was compiling things. And in the Gospel of Luke, you can see where he got it, because he got most of his work for his gospel from the Gospel of Mark. He just took Mark and copied it, and then he fixed things because he thought, well, I don't think Mark wrote that right, so this is the way to write it. So he changed things he didn't think was correct. Then we also know that Luke and Matthew had some other source, which scholars have called the Q source. The word for source in German is Quell or Kell. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. It begins with the letter Q. Scholars are very intelligent, but not very creative. So they just took the first word in the word source and said it's the Q is the other source. And we know also the way that Matthew and Luke both use that text, as well as we can see that text sometimes in the Gospel of Thomas, that Luke likewise changed some of those stories as well. So Luke was not above changing the story if he thought it wasn't told right, whatever he thought right was. So we know he did that in the Gospel. We would assume, therefore, he did the same kind of thing with Acts. We don't have these other documents to compare it to, so we can't say that. But we'd assume how he wrote Luke, he also wrote Acts. And you can tell in Acts that there's these two big sections. Up through chapter 7, Peter is kind of the leading disciple. Peter takes the lead in all these things. And everything is set in Jerusalem. Beginning with chapter 9, moving forward, Paul is the major character in all those stories. And the setting goes where Paul goes. Now there's a couple transitional chapters where Paul goes to Jerusalem, where the council of Jerusalem will decide about these Gentiles. So there's a few, it's not as simple as like chapter 9 goes on. But chapter 8 in Acts is a very unique source. Now some scholars think it was part of the first source with Jerusalem. But chapter 8, Philip, who was one of the 7 deacons chosen in chapter 6, Philip the evangelist is the main character. It's the only chapter in all of Acts. So you have this little small source that has the story of the Ethiopian eunuch. And then the rest of the book is this main source where Paul's the hero. And because Paul is the leading theologian of the first century church. And in that version, Cornelius is lifted up as the first Gentile Christian. Not the Ethiopian. But the source is this one where Paul is written about. So that becomes a very popular and very powerful part of Luke's story, and that is the main story the church takes. The other thing about Cornelius is he's a European. He's a white man. He has a respectable family. He has all the things the early church wanted to lift up. Whereas the Ethiopian eunuch, his story is in this very small source. We only hear about Philip one more time in Scripture, where Paul and the other people with him go by and stay at Philip's house. So he's kind of this forgotten character. So it's not surprising that that chapter is kind of overlooked. And then, of course, you have all the cultural dimensions throughout Christianity spreading throughout Europe, among white Europeans, and you have this strange story about this black African who's a eunuch. And after a while, people don't even use the term eunuch anymore. What are eunuchs? So it became this exotic, strange story, and it's easy to forget. And not to mention, when you begin looking at it and you say, well, in America or Europe, we're white people, and now we're enslaving black people, so it makes it a very uncomfortable story. Then when people begin talking about, well, what were eunuchs, and they begin finding some things out about eunuchs, that's another uncomfortable story. So, you know, we're just polite people. We don't want to talk about all that uncomfortable stuff. So over time, the story is really forgotten. Now, the way some biblical theologians talk about the story is because they know that Luke is leading up to the Gentiles and how the Christian church spreads to all the Gentiles, because, you know, by the end of the first century, it was becoming a Gentile religion, not a Judaism religion. It was clearly breaking off. So as scholars begin looking at these stories, they say, well, Luke must be leading up to Gentiles becoming Christians, white Europeans becoming Christians. And so they see the Ethiopian story as being one more step there, because the Ethiopian, even though he was a Gentile, was clearly drawn to the Jewish religion because he was going to Jerusalem, worshipped in some sense there. He wouldn't have been allowed in the temple if they knew he was a eunuch. Maybe he didn't wear his eunuch's clothes that day, I don't know. But he was on his way back when this happens. So the way scholars have talked about it said, well, he was a God-fearer. He was a Gentile, but he was already exposed to the Jewish religion and was one step closer to being a Gentile. And that's the way the story is kind of written off among 20th century theologians. As I said last week, I think it deserves its own spotlight, particularly in our culture today. That's enough backstory on that. For today's sermon, I just want to say that I think this topic is very hard for us to deal with, because all of us deal with tough things. And on one level, God bless you, whatever gets you through it, do it, right? Even if I think theologically that's not the right path. Do what you need to survive, right, through the difficult times of your life. And that's partly why this phrase, everything happens for a reason, works out. I mean, let's say you lose your job and it's a difficult time, but then you get a new job, and at your new job you get this new opportunity. Or maybe you meet somebody who later becomes your spouse, or maybe you have to move to another city. And all of that is terrible stuff, but in the end you get a good job and you think, maybe that happened for a reason. See, it's easy for us to get into that kind of thinking. And so when we're dealing with kind of difficult things, but not the worst things, it's easy to use that cliche, everything happens for a reason. But when you look at the most terrible things in life, you just can't say that, right? I mean, if God made the Holocaust happen for some reason, then we don't worship God, we worship some monster. And that's just the way I'm going to say it. All right, enough background on that. So I want you to meet Megan. We're just stretching out Pride weekend for 3 weeks. We had the gay men's chorus 2 weeks ago. We finally got Pride Sunday last week, and now I was going to try to do the talk back with Megan last week, but we knew everyone's going to go to the parade or had to do some things and couldn't come. So I asked her to come this week. So Megan Beach is a part of the congregation I pastored for 20 years, Sardis Baptist Church in town. She's got a unique story and was a Duke Divinity School graduate. And has written a few books, but this one today we want her to talk a little bit about God is not, the Bible is not an anti-gay weapon. So Megan, come tell us a little bit about yourself and about your book. We've got 5 copies, and Megan, if more of them, well, I hope all of you all will buy these 5 copies, and then if more of you want copies, she's going to tell you how to get copies.
Thank you, Tim. Hello, good morning. So just want to say thank you all so much for being here and for having me today. I'm really excited to share more about my book and my story. So I grew up actually not believing in anything beyond this physical world, no afterlife, no gods, no higher power, nothing. I was actually an atheist until my early 20s, around spring of 2020. I had started to wonder about the possibility of all this and started learning more about religion. I was especially drawn to Christianity after 3 individuals really opened up about their testimonies, their stories with me. So I began to pray, talking to God about everything, just really openly, honestly, just talking to God as if he were a close friend. And I also started to read the Bible. And I realized that God was not this angry, homophobic dictator that I thought he was. He was very merciful, very kind, very understanding. And during this time, so much in my life was changing. I was seeing so many things change in my life. Yet the one thing God left untouched was my sexual orientation. I was able to pray many things away, but the gay never left. And I questioned why this might be. I started to dabble in non-affirming ex-gay theology, even called myself an ex-gay for some time. But after really digging into the Bible for myself, researching it for myself, studying it for myself, I saw a lot of flaws in non-affirming theology. I saw how these passages, which are only a few passages out of so many, are taken out of context, have been translated so many different times throughout history. And so while I was supposed to be studying at Duke Divinity, I was also reading on the side about these passages. And I've always been someone who writes. I have another book out and currently working on another book. So I was like, why don't I write a book about this and my story and my journey? Because I saw how many people were interested when I opened up on social media, and I saw other queer Christians who wanted to know more about these translations, these passages. So I began drafting my first book. The Bible is not an anti-gay weapon. And so I have these here today. That's about my story, my journey. I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, just thank you all so much for having me today.
And Megan, in her book, tries to approach some of the scripture passages that are used against persons who are gay and lesbian, and really does a good job of dissecting those passages and how they really ought to be looked at in today in our scientific postmodern world, in which we have very different understanding of things than ancient times. So if you really question about what does the Bible really say about LGBTQ persons, I think Megan takes a great chance to educate you about what scriptures say and about what they don't say, which is probably the strongest part of your book, I would think, what they don't say. Yeah. All right. So what questions do you have about last week's sermon, this week's sermon? Questions for Megan about her book that you want to know before you buy it? Yeah. Who's going to be first? Somebody's got to be first. And everybody, make sure you introduce yourself because Megan doesn't know your name. Yeah. Go ahead. Let me see if it's on. That's our problem. Okay. Okay.
Sandy Clory, and I wasn't here physically last Sunday, but if I miss church, I will live stream and watch on YouTube. And I was really interested in what the sermon was regarding the eunuchs. And my father told us about the eunuchs years ago. My father was from Ethiopia. Yes, and when you speak about being Gentiles, they weren't realistically Gentiles, not where my father, the sect that my father came from. They were called Philashas. Falashas were the first black Jews. So realistically, they were messianic, and they were not beginning, leaving from one realm of belief into Christianity or Judaism. That's who they were. If you study and look under the word in Google, or ask someone that's more versed about it than I am, but the Falashas, spelled Falasha, and it's a really interesting topic.
Yeah, so Sandy, in fact, one interesting piece is that it's only been the last 30 years, 40 years, that Ethiopian Jews were given the right to return, because for so long it was disputed.
That's right.
Israel kind of disputed whether
Yeah.
they really were Jews.
Right. The European
Ethiopian
Jews who were not really Jews,
Right.
because they were
Ethiopian
Ashkenazi
Jews-
and Sephardic.
Yeah,
So,
the Ethiopian Jews, there's a lot of debate as to how they came there. Some idea is that they came when the 10 tribes of the northern Israel were dispersed. And then the other thought is that after the Roman Empire drove Jews away from Jerusalem, when they destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD, and then began driving Jews out of Palestine, that it may have come then. So in terms of the Ethiopian eunuch, it's really impossible to understand what his background was. So that's another debate as to was he a Gentile. But the question
No.
is, in the story, if he was really a Jew, if he had studied Scripture and been raised as a Jew,
they didn't
why
study
did he not
Scripture.
know in the story the passage from Isaiah? Notice in the story, he has to say, what does this mean? I don't know what this means. And the suffering servant passages were very powerful in the intertestament period, in the Second Temple period. So if he was Jewish, he would have understood what that passage meant. He did not. Hence the idea that he really was the first Gentile, a particular part Ethiopian, but not Jewish background. So
Yeah, that's
there's
them.
the background with that.
Yeah, there's difference though. Remember, there's the Falashas, which are
Yes.
the Jews. Then you have the Oromo, they're Arabs. Then you have the Falasha. Then you have the Tigrinian and Amharic. It's a
Right.
whole thing, but I'm speaking of only what I know. My father taught us when we were children, and eunuchs were basically men that were castrated.
And yes, that's the common piece. But we also know that eunuchs were other things as well.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes
Yeah, I
they
don't
were
know.
gay men,
I don't know.
and so
all
they
that.
could overwatch the king's harem because they had no interest in women.
Right.
Sometimes they were enslaved people who had been castrated so that they could serve the royal court. So there's a lot of mystery around the person, which I tried to mention in the sermon.
Right. Okay.
What is clear, however, is two things. One, he was sub-Saharan Africa, meaning he was a black man.
Oh, yes.
And two,
Original.
however, we understood him as being a eunuch. He was not normative in society in terms of sexuality and gender. And that alone, I think, speaks to what that story can say to us today. So there's,
Okay.
so, yep. thank
It's
you.
a lot. It's a lot.
It is a lot.
Believe me, I stay up till 5 o'clock in the morning. I know I really study.
Nancy?
Last year, after the Pride Parade, our church went to Monroe and participated in the Pride weekend in Monroe, Union County.
Bless you.
It was the most profound experience I think I've had, because I'm white, female, and old, heterosexual. I'm normal, whatever normal is. I don't think I've ever been in a place in which we were surrounded by a fence, the whole booths and things for people. And on the outside of the fence were churches and groups yelling at us. And yelling I had to cry. You know, because and one, you know, each group, we were on the corner, so our church got a lot of the information coming out of their bullhorns. And they were kind of in our face. And so they'd come by our booth first, and we would talk about how our church and God is inclusive and loving for all people. And this bullhorn guy comes back and says, God is not inclusive. And I go, what? You know, and so we laughed first, and then my want was, yes, God is inclusive. I feel your pain. I feel the pain of people that are walking the journey of transsexual, gay, lesbian, whatever. I can't apologize for other people, but I know I had prejudice when earlier. But know that there are people in this world that love you for who you are and what you are and on your journey. So thank you for what you're doing.
Megan, why don't you talk about Nancy's comment and why you wrote the book?
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I've experienced a lot of homophobia throughout my life. I'm 29 now, so now it feels a bit more accepting, but growing up in middle school, I was called slurs. I was pushed around, beat up by the popular straight girls. So I have experienced a lot of that, but I'm in a much better place. I'm very grateful for the support, the friends that I have. And I just really hope that my book helps people know that God does not hate people, that the God that I heard growing up was God hates FAGs, and that's not who God is. And that is a very twisted version of a few cherry-picked verses that are not as clear as everyone thinks they are. The Bible actually never says being gay is a sin. That is someone's interpretation of a verse. And so I just really hope that my book can help people, that it can open some minds, that it can provide some knowledge, answer some questions. I think everyone always has questions. But just to help people know that God is love and God is very inclusive. And whosoever believes, not whosoever is straight believes. It's whosoever believes. So.
Hey, Tilly, come on in.
I would like to approach another lie, which I think is the lie, all will be well, all will be well, implying that whatever happens, it's going to be all right down the road. And the reality is, sometimes everything is never going to be all right again. I think what we have to do in looking at all difficulty is to look at how we define God. If God is perceived as He, somehow the big man with the gray hair up in the attic somewhere or in the sky or wherever, if that's the God that you're looking for, it's not there. But if we're able to see that God is here in us, among us, within the community, within our friends, within our family, this is God.
Yeah. That's so well said, Tilly. And, at the end of my sermon today, I mentioned something that my pastor, who had all those tragedies happen to him, where he said, that his experience has made him realize that some things are broken beyond repair. Not going to be all well. But because God works in our lives to help repair us, things are not broken beyond use. It's not going to be like it was before. That doesn't mean God can't still stitch our lives back together so we can somehow live again and even experience joy and can can be useful and enjoy the world, even though we will never be what we were before. And I just think that's so important to say in the church, because these cliches just operate in society, particularly in a society, I think, that is so superficial and is becoming more secular. We have less theological grounding than we have had in many, many years. So I think it's really important to talk about those realities. R.F. also said, I didn't put this in his sermon, he also used to say that don't waste any moment. Even the terrible moments in our lives have something that we can learn from them. It might be anything more than, that's just evil, stay away from that. Or it might be, I've learned a resiliency in myself that I never knew I had. And so the next time I face a difficult time, I will trust that I can get through it. So, even the bad things that happen, God can help us with some good through that. But Tilly, you're exactly right, and I want us to keep saying that. Thank you. Nancy, and then Kathleen.
Sure. Oh, sure. Good morning, and I first want to say thank you for your sermons last week and this week. I think we are an incredibly blessed, lucky church to have those messages from our pulpit. I mean, just, yeah. It's refreshing to hear your vigor with it. So thank you. And Megan, thank you for being here. I actually met you about this time last year. You were signing books at Park Road Bookstore. And I just thank you for having your voice and bringing it into our world. It's one of the things we need more than anything is to hear voices and to hear stories of all kinds, everybody's stories. One of the things that I've been working through and sharing and leading groups about the Bible, it really isn't about what we read in the Bible, it's what we're taught that means. It's what we've been taught. There are a few people who go to seminary and learn to read it and figure it out themselves. The rest of us get to hear someone else teach us what the Bible says. And I was taught growing up in the Southern Baptist Church that I'm a sinner and I'm not worthy of God's love. It's hard to even say those words now. So I'm grateful for a church that isn't true. I'm grateful for writers who express it and who share the journey, who share what the journey is like. So yeah, it's a tricky journey to go from Christian to gay, and to try to be gay and Christian, and then to maybe not be so Christian and to continue to be very gay. So it's a journey, y'all. It's a new book, yeah. So thank you both for being here.
Megan, you want to?
Just thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Just thank you. I really appreciate it.
Well, I mean, I'm going to ask you, so
Okay.
talk about what it means for you to kind of help people really see what the Bible says, not what they've been told.
That's a good question. I'm sorry, can you repeat it?
Yeah, so talk about
okay.
what it meant for you to write this book, to try to explain what the Bible really says about these passages, not what they've been told.
Right, your experience.
Yes, okay. So it is difficult a lot of times to share my research, share my story, because a lot of people, they believe what they've been taught, and what they've been taught is the Bible says this, and the Bible says, like, gay is sin, gay is bad. I get a lot of people telling me you're an abomination, you're a heretic, all that kind of stuff that they've been taught, and just realizing that a lot of people are not even, they're not here, they're not trying to understand, they're trying to argue, and having to give that to God and not let that bother my peace. And I know who I am, and I know the God that I've experienced, and that that is a loving God who is not anti-gay, and knowing that these verses are not anti-gay. So I really appreciate that I have this opportunity to keep just sharing my story and helping those who will listen and who are open to listening. So thank you.
All right, Kathleen?
I'm looking at the sermon. I agree with everything you say. But while you were talking, I thought about Job and the fact that two of the horrible things that happened to him were all his children died, and he had a horrible skin affliction. And I thought about disease. I was telling Francis, coming back in the airplane, I sat next to a woman who had a PhD in chemistry, and she taught at UCLA. And they were working on chemistry in health. And a lot of you know this, some of you may not. My husband's a type 1 diabetic. He was diagnosed at 25. The average life expectancy at that point was 52. He's 74. But he had good health care. He came to Charlotte because they had excellent endocrinologists. He did what he had to do to keep himself healthy, and they invented continual blood glucose monitors and insulin pumps. And diabetes is still a killer. We still have lots of things out there. But this morning coming, and I swear I'm going to shut up, I heard a politician say, "What's health care got to do with Christianity?" And I thought, how much of the woes of this world could be prevented, solved, if we did better with health care. We put more money into it and supported it.
Yeah. Thank you, Kathleen. And I think, you've lived part of today's sermon, and I know you're still mourning Wolf's death, and to lose a child is one of the most painful things. And, I just want to say again, that didn't happen for a reason. It just happened, a part of life, and that God is still working through your family. Yeah. Ed?
I wasn't here last week, so I didn't hear about the eunuch, but I'm struck by your sermon being about, and thank you for that sermon, it was excellent. Lean into the mic, okay, all right. Thank you for the sermon, excellent. You talked about translations. And I was struck by this Ethiopian connection because there's an Ethiopian Bible that has like 88 books in it. Our Bible has 66 books. And
They got more religion than us, Ed.
They've got more religion than we do. Okay, so and there was a big controversy between what goes in the Protestant King James Version Bible. So we have the Apocrypha that the Catholics still include. My point in all that is that, when we go to the Bible looking for authority, it definitely was not written in English. It was not dictated by God to King James. And, the translation process is ongoing. And I was struck by we changed our name. We're the Covenant Church now. We're not the Baptist Church anymore, although we follow Baptist principles. And we say in our covenant that we will be open to all new light. And we say that God's an active presence. And so if God did not leave the building in about, the time Jesus came along 2,000 years ago, if Elvis did not leave the building at that time, but said, "I'm here with you," and Jesus said, "I'm here with you. I'm with you." That, things change. I mean, maybe even God starts to realize that maybe things have to change. So I'm wondering about that, about when we say that we are, God has an active presence, and we're trying to understand, and we really have a tendency to sort of look to the Bible and say, well, if we go through this book and we find out, does it say we're in favor of this or we're against this or whatever? It seems to me that there are some core principles involved. You know, God is love. What's the basic rule? Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Who's your neighbor? You're my neighbor. Thanks for coming. Thanks for writing your book. You're my neighbor. And so beyond that, then we get into start slicing the salami. It seems to me, if we do it with the wrong spirit, we got a problem. So that's
Thank you, Ed. I think, Ed, you bring up this great point. Is part of what's your authority? What's the authority that you're going to base your thoughts and beliefs on? And we think, well, we've got this Bible that we all carry around, and our Bible looks like everybody else's Bible, right? Except we didn't get with our Catholic friend who have more books in their Bible than we do as Protestants. And as you so well put, the Ethiopian Bible has 88 books. So, you can look at if you look at books of the Bible, if you Google that, you can find all these different versions. And then, as I mentioned today, the really crux of this passage, this verse that has been so problematic, the ancient manuscripts have 3 different versions of that verse. Well, how do you know which one Paul wrote? You don't. You don't. And so we have to decide which one we think works with our theology best. Unfortunately, the New Revised Committee went back to the King James Version and didn't stick with the Revised Committee. I will say that my seminary, Andover Newton, which was in Boston for 180 years or whatever, closed their Boston campus a few years ago and merged with Yale. So I'm on their board of directors, and so when I go to a board meeting, I go to Yale now, and in the Yale Divinity School was the place where the Revised Standard Committee met to write out the Bible as we've had it since 1954 with updates. And what I'm told is that they had this one room where all the scholars met. It's like you're like 50, 60 different scholars. And people would say there was such yelling in that room that it would echo down the halls because they were arguing as to one verse, another verse, how to translate it. And I just think that's a great example for us, Ed, in terms of your comment. The Bible is a living word in part because there are multiple understandings to it. And we have to be in conversation with people all the time and with ourselves to say, so what does it say to me now in this day? That's different than what it said 100 years ago, maybe in Germany. And it may be different from what it said from me personally 10 years ago with whatever was going on in my life. In my book, Practicing Midrash, that's really the core piece of that piece, that the Bible, almost every major story of the Bible is told twice or 3 times in the story, in the text. And they almost always have different viewpoints. And we have to figure out which one we're going to choose to follow for our life today. And that gets to the issue. And then you have to come down, what's our core principles? What do we really stand on? And you either say, God is love, or God is not love. God's not inclusive. And you yell it in the bullhorn. So. All right, anybody got one more question? Janet, you come on up, last question. You win the prize.
Yeah, I've loved both of these sermons. One line in here makes me think about, I have this idea that God, in fact, deep belief that God is unconditional love. And so I want to know, the way I read this, we know that in all things God works for good for those who love, who are called according to God's purpose. So why do I hear things like this all through the Bible where it sounds like it's conditional,
Well, and it's because some of the Bible is written from a conditional perspective. One of the great struggles that biblical people had was, is God's love unconditional, never to change? So in the stories about Abraham's covenant, about the land, about giving his descendants the land of Israel, in the stories about Moses being given the 10 Commandments and the law of Moses, and to David, that his family would rule the people forever and ever and ever. There are unconditional versions of every single one of those covenants. And there are conditional versions of every single one of those covenants. And that, I think, gets back to the basic idea that we all struggle with life, and that is, does God love us unconditionally? And maybe for us, can we love unconditionally? Can we love our spouse, our children, our parents, our best friend unconditionally? Really?
It's called agape.
Some of y'all know that really comes in there sometimes. Or are there conditions? And so the book of Deuteronomy is written from the perspective that God's love is conditional. As much as I love Deuteronomy, I hate that part of it. But it's there, and I have to realize it's there. But I will also say, but Deuteronomy, you have the oldest 10 Commandments on record from Exodus 34, which talks about God's everlasting love and God's unconditional love. And so I will try to find wisdom in Deuteronomy's theology, but I'm trumping on Exodus 34 wins every time. So that's just the way it is for my book. And each of us have to figure that out for ourselves, right? And that's why that's why the Bible is a living word, because we are never going to solve it. And because there's different ideas in the text. So we're going to keep saying at this congregation, God is love, and we'll listen to the bullhorns every now and then that say no. So I'm sure we'll have some more bullhorns, right? Yeah, we'll let everybody know when Pride weekend is in Union County. We'll see if another group. Megan, last word.
Thank you all again for having me. I really appreciate this, and just want you all to know that whosoever believes is saved, and if you believe in your heart and confess with your mouth, you are saved. It's in Romans.
Yep. All right, so Megan's going to be over here. If you want to purchase one of her books, I'm getting my book out of here, so don't take my book. So she does have 5 books here. Please purchase those. She'll take cash. She'll take checks. Do you take Venmo or something like that too? Okay, whatever. Talk to her about that, and then she'll also tell you how to. Yeah, she has a QR code. Yeah, she got a QR code, so you can figure out how to do that too. All right, thank you all so much. 13th. All right. 19th. All right. Okay, thank you all. Have a good week. Next week we got baptisms.